Kick Action Media presents Where No Pod Has Gone Before.
Welcome back to Where No Pod Has Gone Before. I am Farcissist. I am going to introduce to you my my point of view that encapsulates everything that this article talks about. Now, this article I'm about to read is from Tom Rogers, and it's called Star Trek: The Phenomenon. You're going to find this essay article. It's going to be in Marvel Super Special number 15. That's Marvel Comics. They came out with magazine format comic books, and this one is entitled Star Trek: The Motion Picture. So it kind of gives you an indication of when it was written. Understand that at this point in time, all we had were the animated series of Star Trek and Star Trek. And that's all we had, the original series. And then suddenly you get Star Trek: The Motion Picture. This hit me at the right point in my life. It all began on September 8th, 1966 at 8:30 p.m. On that fateful day, NBC TV aired its first episode of a new series, The Man Trap, from a little science fiction gem entitled Star Trek. Never before has humanity seen such a program on the tube, and this was immediately obvious to most. The episode, produced by creator Gene Roddenberry and written by George Clayton Johnson, was about some space sailors who went around in a marvelously designed starship called the USS Enterprise. Earlier that year, TV Guide had described the concept a wagon train of the stars, or some such nonsense. Oh, by the way, reader, listener here, Tom Rogers has some opinions. Some of them are pretty strong. But we'll just keep going. Wagon Train had been a fairly well-done weekly Western, and there was nothing really uncommon about it. Star Trek, on the other hand, was very definitely unique. Prior to 1966, only one other science fiction effort on television had contained any adult appeal because of its quality and frequent intellectualism. Joe Stefano's The Outer Limits, aired on ABC TV. That was an anthology series without any continuing characters. Star Trek was something far more difficult to create. A regular weekly production with continuing characters. The concept was mind-boggling since it had never been done right before. Man Trap was, without a doubt, an offering that was in the style of The Outer Limits. It dealt with a murderous, salt-eating creature from another world that had possessed intelligence, telepathy, and a shape-changing ability. There were excellent directional techniques, fine production values, rampant sexual illusions, death and destruction, and the intriguing new characters. Of course, there were also somewhat silly phasers, which at one point intoxicated a man into a slow-motion speech by affecting his nervous system. Nonetheless, this was certainly worth watching, and it was quickly set the trend for a lot of science fiction that was to follow. 1 week later, the program deteriorated into a bit of something that had much tamer of a theme, Charlie X, about a human teenager who was raised by telekinetic aliens. He was emotionally immature, nearly omnipotent by our standards, and really nasty. In spite of itself, this tale of a youth's sexual awakening was filled with pathos and tragedy, and it brought tears to the eyes of many viewers. Star Trek was by no means common TV junk. There was hope for this generation of viewers. The days of Lost in Space and its ilk were hopefully, finally over. The succeeding episode, Where No Man Had Gone Before, the theme of the show, was back on the beam. Herein, Kirk and the rest of the Enterprise crew were challenged by an Earthling with godlike powers. Spock, the half-breed Vulcan, urged, "Kill him," as their foe's ability grew, but his good human captain would not hear of it until it was too late. On the other hand, it was the very idea of a good guy slaying someone in cold blood that had practically never been seen on the tube. But we all knew that the pointy-eared cutie was dead right when he made the suggestion. We were back to a serious activities of death and destruction, and we were loving every minute of it. Actually, this was supposed to be the very first Star Trek adventure, but NBC had shown them out of sequence. Already the network executives were causing a problem with a series that would later consider to become inconsequential. This was how it was pretty much for the next 2 years, except that the regular characters became considerably more complicated. Moreover, the crew was integrated with blacks, Orientals, Russians, and even who showed somewhat resembled the devil. Incidentally, NBC wanted to drop Mr. Spock after the first year because they felt that his alarming visage was offensive to the Bible Belt, but Roddenberry would not comply. Ultimately, there was a great deal of death, sex, and scantily clad women on the program, and most of the scripts were far above average. The viewers naturally loved it, and a cult following immediately began. When NBC announced that Star Trek was going to be canceled after its second season, the fans let themselves really be heard for the first time. A massive letter-writing campaign ensued, led by Beau Trimble, Star Trek Concordance. And the network was soon deluged by appropriately 1 million letters asking, demanding, pleading, threatening that Star Trek be renewed. There were rallies and protest marches in New York and California, and all manner of other evidence that there were a lot of product-buying viewers who liked the program enough to fight for its return. Consequently, NBC renewed Star Trek by announcing it on the air, a precedent, after an episode that was rerun one evening. They desperately wanted people to stop writing in because, they had become too costly for them to keep up with the incredible volume of all the mail. The movement had succeeded, but the network managed to sabotage the show nonetheless. They scheduled it for Fridays at 10 p.m. after Laugh-In, and it died after the third season. Or did it? Almost immediately, all 79 episodes were packaged by Paramount TV and syndicated. Most wise station programmers decided to run the episodes at least 5 times a week, and the show became more popular than ever. Star Trek was distributed across the world, and it even now is experiencing fantastic popularity. For example, available in 114 cities, not many series have ever had such a response from the public. I Love Lucy is one of them, and few will in the future. Speaking of the future, that is what Star Trek is all about. It gives us something to look forward to, a time in the 23rd century when humanity had become one. There's almost no prejudice and no vices have been suppressed in favor of altruism and dedication to a cause. The latter is the growth, development, and protection of the United Federation of Planets and an intergalactic brotherhood that encompasses all friendly races. Nearly everyone lives in harmony and peace, and Starfleet spaceships patrol the universe in a never-ending quest for peace, love, and friendship. The Federation is determined to help sentient beings everywhere. Yet, they are constantly threatened by unfriendly life forms. In the long run, though, the wisdom of its officers and enlisted personnel often win out, and hope for a much better tomorrow is reserved and renewed. These are human dramas, often filled with sensitive portrayals dealing with realistic characterizations and extremely likable people. They're often scientifically plausible in a fanciful sense, and they strive to keep young people interested in worthy endeavors, like our country's space program. A view of the futuristic societies, many of which, including Earth, are veritable utopias, is presented. The human potential is dealt with in a highly optimistic manner, and the futuristic technology is highly advanced and what we would like it to be. And there are starships that can span entire solar systems in very short periods of time. The thrill of such accomplishments, as well as the marvelous sense of wonder, give one a wonderful thrill when the viewer considers that this might really happen someday. Many alien races work hand in hand with humanity to reach out and boldly go where no person has gone before. The obvious philosophical messages are equally intriguing. There are tales dealing with gods, a relative term naturally, monsters, sex, emotions, ambition, optimism, misguided civilizations, prejudice, and so on. And they were often very well executed. There are also occasional misinterpretations on the part of the regular cast. The characters try to keep an open mind, realizing that others have different beliefs and ways of life. However, the viewer is shown often in subtle ways that a negative approach is often very dangerous, embarrassing, and or tragic. Our universe is vast, and there is undoubtedly a lot of it, and that we are totally unfamiliar with. On a more obvious level, 79 episodes are a great deal of fun. For the most part, They had good characterizations, mystery, intrigue, humor, suspense, pathos, moral lessons, and so on. The direction was generally superior. Special effects were certainly above average, and most aliens were convincing. Often humanoid civilizations were dealt with, exposing us to a variety of similar societies and mores. The stories themselves were generally well written and completely acted. Competently acted. And the sets and the costuming were very impressive and colorful. This was a quality production, and an expensive one for the period, too. Noted scientist and writer Isaac Asimov is reported to have stated that Star Trek was the purest representation of true science fiction on television. Many others agree with him, myself included, despite the fact that it has been in reruns for years now. It remains one of the best series of all time, if not the best. Unfortunately, things changed a bit when 1973 rolled around. On September 15th of that year, the animated program made its debut, and it was a disappointment. While it was bad for a Saturday morning TV show, it represented Star Trek stories that were simply awful when compared to the live-action episodes. Not only were they kiddie-oriented, which of course is to be expected considering the medium and time slot, but a number of them deviated so much from the original that continuity made glaring mistakes and even altered the series' history. The initial adventures had been filmed in logical sequence, often reflecting events that had occurred in earlier episodes. Don't get me wrong, not all Star Trek episodes were excellent. While some received various deserved awards, others were so bad that they should never have been made. A prime example is Spock's Brain, which was the first one aired during the third season. Another was The Way to Eden, about space hippies. You can't always have a winner, but the original Star Trek has more than its share of greatness. Some of the more controversial episodes dealt with religion, politics, war, and other series taboos. Consequently, certain episodes were never shown in various areas of the United States because station managers felt that their viewers would be offended. More often, though, the entire series were cut out to make adventures more subdued, less violent, and far less intellectual. Even today, this practice is still in effect on a variety of locales. Many people who are not yet enthused by Star Trek think of its fans as being strange people, malcontents, freaks, brain-damaged outcasts of society who have nothing better to do with their lives than to idolize a dumb science fiction show. While a few Trekkies, as we are all called, later people talk about Trekkers, but we'll stick with this time period for now. For the most part, the program's fans consist of some highly intellectual, intelligent, sophisticated individuals. They're famous writers, scientists, business people, and even government officials who proudly proclaim that they like the show. The average Trekkie is above average intelligence and has a sense of wonder and sets themselves apart from those unfortunate enough to lack the appreciation for Star Trek and or science fiction in general. Not all science fiction enthusiasts are Trekkies, and not all Trek fans are science fiction buffs, but the two often go together. However, Star Trek is not merely sci-fi oriented. There are episodes that have themes encompassing military justice, the Old West, World War II, submarine-type warfare, ancient Greece, and so on. There is something for everyone when you really get down to it. As the ever-popular saying goes, Star Trek lives. It definitely does, and one has to only look around to see it. We now finally have the monumental motion picture, and as a result, a lot of tie-in merchandise is being released to the public. However, for the past years, it has been obvious that the program never died. Despite all of NBC's efforts, there are close to 400 known fan clubs devoted to this program, and successful conventions have been held all over the world and still are. Remember, this was done in 1979. There have been a large number of master's and doctoral theses based on or dealing partly with Star Trek. The phenomenon also lives. The first convention of this sort was given in New York City on January 1972. About 600 people were expected to attend, but nearly 4,000 showed up. This was largely because Gene and Majel Barrett Roddenberry, D.C. Fontana, and Isaac Asimov were the guests. Since then, most, if not all, Star Trek cons have been extremely successful. They are almost always featuring guests who are connected with the program. Likewise, there are some overseas. including England, France, Japan, West Germany, and so on. Again, I reiterate, this was back in 1979. It's a lot more now. A few of them are devoted primarily to just one or more actors from the show, and not just the regulars either. There are a number of them honoring Mark Leonard, Marriott Hartley, and so on. As of this writing, there are close to 50 different companies putting out authorized Star Trek merchandise, including some of America's top toy manufacturers and book publishers. In all, there are about 60 books available, including short story adaptations of the original episodes, photo novels, with color scenes from separate missions, new adventures based on the program, and studies of the production and its effect on society. Again, this is 1979. There is no doubt that Star Trek has made a tremendous impact on our society. Even the experimental space shuttle was named Enterprise, in honor of the much-beloved series. Why then did it take so long for a movie to be released? There were a number of reasons, primarily those concerning money and the availability of the original stars. Just be happy, as we all are, that Star Trek the Motion Picture was finally upon us, with its fine script and incredible special effects, and hope that the next media adventure in the series will emerge in the not-too-distant future. According to the show and its new film, there is hope for humanity. We will find our place in the stars and even influence many societies. Long ago, H.G. Wells wrote about a variety of utopias, but they are still non-existent. Someday, hopefully, the days of the Federation may come to pass, and our descendants will benefit from a society that now exists not only in our reality, but in our fantasy. Star Trek must live forever because it represents our eventual salvation. Live long and prosper.
This is Aaron Krieger for my first Where No Pod Has Gone Before essay. What was my earliest experience with Star Trek? Well, Star Trek is actually tied to one of my earliest memories. I was 3.5 years old, and I know that I was 3.5 years old because it was the period of your life when you were a kid, when people would ask you how old you were. And with some sense of pride, you'd say, I'm 3.5, not just 3, not just 4, but 3.5, pulling out that fraction years before I even knew what fractions were. So I was 3.5 years old. It was 1978. And my parents owned the Bel Air Motel in Grand Junction, Colorado. And I was plopped in front of the TV, which was this giant early color set that also doubled as living room furniture. Just this Borg cube of television tube with terrible reception. I think you'd have to slap it on the side, and you could also serve dinner on top of it. It was like wood paneled. So I was tuned into like one of the 3 or 4 channels that we actually had, probably NBC. I believe the next year in 1979 we finally got hooked up for cable when we became early adopters of the new crazy channel called HBO. And so if memory serves me, that's like the video recording of life started at that moment. I was 3.5 years old, plopped in front of the television, and although I'd seen Star Wars, I'd been to movies, I'd seen Jaws, I'd had experiences. I'd ripped open my nose on a fence post. I hurt my shoulder at one point before that. Have no conscious memory of any of those things happening. But as soon as the channel was turned to the television, I have almost like video recording of consciousness from that moment on. That's where life starts for me. And it's right when I start watching an old series episode of Star Trek called This Side of Paradise. And it's an episode from the first season where the Enterprise crew gets infected with some sort of radioactive spores, and everyone starts going all hippy dippy down on this like summer spring planet. It's the episode where, if you've seen still pictures, it's the one where Spock is dressed all in overall civvies and he's chillaxing with a blonde lady in the grass. That's the episode I was watching. Kirk has to go down and anger slap him into clearing his head out, and then they both get back into problem-solving mode, and they fix it all for everybody. but that's the episode that I was watching. It's just this weird Star Trek episode where Kirk basically teaches me the life lesson of when in doubt, when in trouble, smack your first officer and everything will be okay. And from that moment on, I have conscious memories of my life. Before that, it was kind of a fog of stories that my parents told me to fill in the blanks. But my earliest human and childhood memory is of Star Trek, and from that moment on, I would watch it whenever it was on TV, and became a lifelong fan.
Get in touch with the podcast at podbefore@gmail.com. That's podbefore@gmail.com. You can catch us on YouTube, where no pod has gone before. You can catch us on Facebook, where no pod has gone before. Keep in touch with us. And if you have any questions, comments, please let us know. This is the Farcissist saying, straight on till morning.
Kick action.
Media.